I suppose my experience has given me an insight into the political system in Ireland, and it's very clear to me that the political system in Ireland is a broken system. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. It's interesting that one of the major problems in Ireland, to be asked politically, is the fact that the main political tool used in this country is this. What way is the wind blowing? And it's the tool that the vast majority of politicians use to navigate their way through their lives. And for me, that's the opposite of what a political system should be about. Politics should be about issues of real importance to people and individuals who stand up for what they believe in and stand against the prevailing winds of the time if necessary, to ask the hard questions and to break the groupthink. And groupthink is all over this country at the moment. There's a number of key ingredients to that groupthink. Now, it might surprise people here that every Thursday there is a vote on the bills in the Dáil that happened that week. And every Thursday, I would say the majority of TDs don't know what the content of the bill is, and many of them wouldn't even know what the name of the bill is that they're actually voting upon. Because the Irish political system determines that there's no need for them ever to know what the content of the bill is. Because they're not entitled to vote on the content of the bill. They're only entitled to vote on whatever the whip of the party tells them to vote on. And people ask me, Peadar, there's a debate the other night about homelessness and children, and how come there's nobody at that debate? There was hardly 6 people in the chamber. And the reason that nobody turns up to those debates is because those debates are theatre. They're not real debates. When I debate you, there's a possibility that we might change each other's minds in a debate. And in a good political debate in a parliament or the Dáil, there should be always a possibility that a person is listening to that debate with their ears open to learn something and maybe to be swayed by that particular debate. But that can't happen in Leinster House because people have to vote according to their whip. And as a result, all of the debate is just pure theatre. The whip decides which way the party is going to vote on before the debate, end of story. And there's a number of other ingredients to it. The whip, as you probably know yourself, was invented by Irish politicians at the time of the Irish Parliamentary Party. So in other words, at the time MPs were going from Ireland to London, it was a mixed, motley crew of MPs. They had very little sway, very little leverage. So Parnell and the leadership of that party decided to whip them into shape, literally, into a very tight organisation. And they managed then to be able to exert leverage over the British political system. But the problem is, in this country, we use the whip far more rigidly and extremely than any other country. Indeed, you go to our neighbouring island, and on many occasions, they will actually have a system where the whip is enforced. In Germany, it's illegal to enforce the whip in the parliament because of the fact the constitution says that each elected rep should be voting on the basis of their conscience on these issues. And then we have a political system itself which has radically changed as well. Years and years ago, our Ardeshina used to be platforms of serious debate and engagement. And now they've turned into slick publicity stunts, where the leaderships of the organisations circumvent the members and simply talk to the media. And political parties used to be grassroots-led and activist-led, but that's changed altogether. And now parties are centrally controlled and policy is shifted downwards. So policy is designed on focus groups and opinion polls and Twitter, but it's not necessarily what is coming from the grassroots of an organisation. So people would have seen it in the Fianna Fáil had an Ardèche there a couple of years ago, and nearly 90% of the membership of Fianna Fáil voted to retain the 8th. And Billy Kelleher, straight afterwards, says, but that's fine, but the Parliamentary Party will make this decision. And the Parliamentary Party did make the decision, and it basically gave the 2 fingers to the rank and file Fianna Fáil members. Now, members of a party are not canvas fodder. They're not there to be used coming up to an election, to put up posters in the lashing of rain. They're also there to steer a political organisation. And that's one of the problems that's happening in the political system currently. And then you have the situation on how ministers are selected in this country as well. So, Ministers are usually selected on how sweet they are with the leaders of the party. So if they can be trusted by the leader in a tight space to side with the leader, but then the leader will grant them ministerial office. Or on the basis of gender, or on the basis of geography, etc., that a minister might be selected. A minister is never selected in this country on the basis of technical knowledge. And technical knowledge should be the criteria by which a minister is selected. And ability. So ministers go into departments, and in those departments, that minister, he or she is surrounded by maybe 20 or 30 people. Some of them with PhDs in the particular subjects. Some of them 20 or 30 years invested in that particular department. And those heads of department capture many of those ministers and tell them 100 reasons why what they want to achieve can't be achieved. And what happens after a while is those ministers start to run on a treadmill of literally memorizing press statements and pushing those press statements out and then defending their departments. And that's not how it should be. Those ministers should be elected from the people and they should pursue the needs of the people. But that doesn't happen, unfortunately, in Ireland. And even amongst TDs, people will it's quite incredible. Most TDs currently, when they look to find out what the policy is of the party on a certain issue, they don't go to the policies TD who's in charge of that area. They typically go to the press office, and the press office gives them their press statement, and then they learn that press statement off, and then they regurgitate that press statement out into the public media. But that's not how it should be. Those TDs should be the people who are researching, investigating, and developing that policy. Now, there's no doubt that there are some TDs that do that, but very, very many don't. Those TDs should be the TDs that are tasked with asking the difficult questions. Now, groupthink, people might feel is not that much of an important issue. But everybody in this room, man, woman and child, owes about 40,000 euros to international investors and vulture funds. Why? Because the state was driven off a cliff in 2007 and 2008. And at the time, there was literally nobody in the political system that had the backbone to break the groupthink. There was a groupthink endemic in Irish society amongst politics and media, which said that the spiral of upward prices would continue. And that's one of the ingredients that led to the crash that we're in. And every year now we pay about 7 billion euros on interest alone off the debt that was created. And I often think it's a kind of a three-card trick that the government to play, because the government has made people feel that there's a recovery happening. Sure, things are better for a few people in the country. But what people don't realise is what they've done is they've shifted this massive debt simply into the future. That debt hasn't disappeared, and indeed we are one of the most heavily indebted nations per capita in the country. So we know that obviously we have a serious problem with groupthink. One other issue that I'll mention, one of the other ingredients to groupthink is we have a very small media in Ireland. Now there are decent journalists out there for sure, but there's only about 600 national journalists in the country. Most of them are from a particular age bracket, demographic, and geographic location. And most of them work for about 5 or 6 really large media companies. And I know for a fact that, and journalists will tell you off the record, that they have to pay mortgages and rent too. And they have their eye all the time on their media company and a possible necessity to get a job in another company in the future. And many of them tailor their activities, obviously it suits the editorial directions of those media companies. And in a proper functioning democracy, you would have a diversity of views in the media. But in Ireland, actually, most of the media congregate on the same space. And that creates a major difficulty, because when they congregate on the same space, they force many of the political establishments to congregate on many of the same spaces politically as well. So what you have is virtually every single political party in this country, as a result, seeking to occupy the same space and time politically on a whole range of core issues. There is absolutely very little diversity in the political spectrum whatsoever. And that's a very dangerous thing. First of all, opposition, respectful opposition, is not the enemy. Respectful opposition is a key part of a functioning democracy. And if you don't have respectful opposition, in a country, first of all, the country will think as one in groupthink, and it's more likely to make serious problems because nobody's questioning the elite at all. But if you don't have respectful opposition in a country, you force many people to the margins. And when people are on the margins, they vote for other elected reps on the margins. And we see what happens in the likes of the United States and in Britain and in France happening at the moment. And there's no doubt that that will happen in Ireland too. So in a functioning democracy, the 34% of the population that voted no in the referendum, ideally 34% of it all would reflect their views. Any national parliament should reflect the views that exist in the general public in roughly the same proportions as they exist. And if they don't do that, they're not doing their job whatsoever. And that's a major problem. So that's one of the serious crises in Irish politics at the moment. The second issue that I have a problem with in Irish politics is, and it goes back to some of the issues that we discussed, is that the culture in Irish politics has led TDs simply to look at their leader, one eye on their leader, seeking brownie points so that they can progress through the careers, and one eye on their seats to make them safe. And then they have no eye left for the constituents that they're meant to represent. And politicians get involved in politics on the basis of a career. And there's nothing worse, I tell you, than a payroll politician. They are the curse of a proper functioning democracy, because they will do anything it takes. They'll sell their granny, if necessary, to keep their seat. What you want in politics is a person who actually is not looking after their seat to a certain extent, who is willing to stand up against the stream and the flow of a country, who's willing to actually take risks, who's willing to step outside of the consensus and the groupthink. And we need to make sure that we have an organisation that does that. And that's why the political organisation that we're looking to develop, it will have a very tight focus with regards to the message that it wants to deliver and the objectives that it wants to achieve. But we also want our elected representatives to be able to think for themselves and to be able to speak for themselves and to be able to stand up for themselves as well. And we want to make sure that we have an activist organisation, a grassroots organisation, where the leadership of the party is actually a little bit afraid of the grassroots, that they can steer the party in the future. And sure, every single political organisation has the internal infrastructure of democracy within them. But to varying degrees, that infrastructure of democracy is ignored by the political parties. And that has to change, and that will change Accordia with regards to ourselves. There's absolutely no doubt about that. One of the things, obviously, that because of the nature of Irish politics, we have an extraordinary ability in Ireland for orthodoxy. So in other words, in the 50s, people often say, well, in the 50s there was a really rigid orthodoxy in Ireland, and there was very little tolerance for different views. But if you think about it, there's a very rigid orthodoxy today, and there's extremely little tolerance of different views. We are the 1950s in this country, just in mirror image, in flip. Nothing has changed. Tolerance is a really important part of a liberal democracy. The facilitation of different views is a really important part of a liberal democracy. Now, just the interesting thing that I've noticed at these meetings is it feels like there's a pressure cooker after building up in Irish politics. And so many people are really frustrated and really angry by the fact that all of the political mainstream have become uniform on these issues. And people stick up their hands and they say, Peadar, we have nobody to vote for anymore. We are disenfranchised by the groupthink in our country. And I speak to Fianna Fáil people, Sinn Féin people, Fine Gael people, and others who say, Peadar, I have realised that I am in the wrong political party. That the leadership of my party is doing damage to my core values. They're saying to me that the leadership of their party is going in the wrong direction to them. Now, many of them said, but Peadar, I've been in the party for 20 years. I have lots of friends in the organisation. I have lots of contacts, there's tradition, there's comradeship, there's all that. And listen, they are important things, there is no doubt about that. But politics is not a social club. Political activism is far more important to that. And if people remain in the political parties that are doing damage to their core values, in many ways, those people are complicit in that damage that's being done to themselves. And they need to get out. And they need simply to realign themselves with a political organisation that actually mirrors their needs. And I believe that the world is actually going through a political realignment at the moment. And it's funny because you can go through generations in a country where the political system is frozen in time and there's very little movement whatsoever. But right across the world, major changes are happening with regards to people's ideological focus and their political allegiances. And I'm going to talk about some of the reasons around that as well. So first of all, I want to say that we're going to go through a number of our political policies, be able to buy into exactly everything that's in our political manifesto, for sure. If you have 5 Irish people in a room, you usually have 7 or 8 different opinions on what's going on. So what I'm saying to people is, if you can buy into about 65% of the content of what we're about, try to have a little bit of tolerance for some of the differences that may exist between ourselves in the room or in the party. And let's focus on building and achieving those 65% of those issues, because they're really, really important. So first of all, I will say that this organisation is an organisation that seeks to achieve the unity of the Irish people. And Irish reunification is a very, very important issue for me. And obviously, I'm in the great county of Wexford, and Wexford has been the epicentre in many times with regards to revolution and that desire for self-determination. Now, the reason I want to see Irish reunification first and foremost is because I believe in self-determination. Have a look at the person beside you. Would you trust that person beside you to make every single decision for you for the rest of your life? You might love them, you might trust them, but I don't think you'd actually hand over your ability to determine your future. Now, some of you might say, well, they're already deciding for me already what's going on in my life. But the point is that when decisions are made by somebody else, there can never be fully for your best interest. They might do their best at times, but there's always an ulterior idea or motive going on. And the same it is with countries. So, Brussels, Berlin, and London will never make decisions for us completely for our benefits. It'll always be around their particular interests. Self-determination is also important because through self-determination, decisions should be made as close to the people as they affect as possible. Because when that decision-making process is close to you, you can actually affect some influence on that process. And also, if it's far away from you, you have no chance of holding those people to account. So, for example, right now, our country is in turmoil. Why? Because of the egos and the whims of some Tory party members in London. Do we have any influence over the Tory party in London? Do we have any way to hold them to account whatsoever? But shockingly, they are determining our economic future. They're determining the border that exists in our country. They're determining the All-Ireland economy and our ability to move and prosper as a people. And I think that's wrong. I think Irish people should determine Irish laws, and that's the way it should be. There's also the issue of the benefit of the All-Ireland economy and the All-Ireland society. I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to be the first TD since partition in the Dáil to carry out a study on the All-Ireland economy. I couldn't believe that no other TD had actually carried out such a study in the Dáil. And I spoke to well over 100 people, people from business, people from trade unions, people from health, community, churches, farmers, the whole range of Irish society, north and south. And all of them agreed that, forget about the politics of the border or anything like that, but for Ireland, if we plan together, if we fund together, and we deliver services together, they will be stronger, more efficient, and more effective services. Simple as that. So that's what we need to be looking at. The other issue that I want to speak about with regards to Irish unity that's important is, I believe that there is a justice to Irish unity. And I think a lot of people, because of Brexit, are starting to realise that. 102 years ago, the Union Jack flew over Wexford. It flew there in some iteration for maybe 500 years. And it represented the strongest, most powerful empire that the world had ever seen. And yet there was a generation of Irish people who simply said, we've had enough. Enough of being discriminated against. And we want our own self-determination. Now, this was probably the weakest generation that existed in Ireland for hundreds of years, because they came about 30 to 40 or 50 years after the famine. And the famine, as you know, led to the deaths of 1.5 million people and the emigration of 1.5 million people. The country was decimated. Yet this particular generation decided to take on the strongest empire that the world has ever seen to achieve that self-determination. And thankfully, as a result, we are here today and we enjoy that self-determination. But 150 miles up the road, there are people who voted to remain in the Brexit referendum a couple of years ago, and their self-determination is ignored. And I think that is incredibly wrong, that we have to change in that regards. So, we want to make sure that we see the border as a wall with maybe 1,000 blocks. Each one of those blocks stands for a really practical item, like a cross-border ambulance service, like an All-Ireland corporation tax, or an All-Ireland excise duty, an All-Ireland soccer team, an All-Ireland retail promotion, All-Ireland tourism. Just really practical issues that if you have convergence, you have improvements with regards to the delivery of those services. And I believe we need, as a country, to start to tackle those issues. And we need to focus on the All-Ireland economy. The All-Ireland economy is one of the best ways to mitigate the most serious excesses of upcoming Brexit. And that needs to be focused on. And none of the parties are focusing on that issue to the sense that it should be focused on at all. The other issue that I want to talk to you is about social... Well, actually, just to point out on that, we are a Republican party, but we're a broad Republican party. And what I mean by that is, we will be a home from people who are from Sinn Féin, a home from people who are Fianna Fáil, a home for people who are SDLP, some from Fine Gael, and some of the other organisations. If you believe in economic justice, if you believe in the human right to life, if you believe in an all-Irish economy and society, well then we're going to make space. Because in 1916 and 1918, two men, vastly different in ideology, W.T. Cosgrave and Cathal Brugha, miles away from each other, managed to fit inside the same Republican organisation to fight for their common goals. And that's what we need to do. We need to build an organisation that's broad enough, that people feel comfortable enough in, and that we can fight for our goals. Now, the issues of economic justice are also radically important. We're living in one of the most divided times in history. There's about at least half the population currently who are locked out of Leo Varadkar's Ireland. These are the 750,000 people who exist on the hospital waiting lists. These are the 110,000 people who were on trolleys last year. These are the 2,500 kids who had to wait for more than a year just to access mental health services for the first time. These are the 500,000 people who are in housing distress currently. I'm working with families who are still in the court system because of the mortgage distress that they're in, because of the last housing crash. 10 years after that crash, we're still dealing with the collateral damage of that crash, and many of those are still facing evictions. And yet we're on the precipice of another housing bubble. Is there absolutely no ability to learn in the political establishment in this country? And so many people have an inability to pay rents currently. Now, one of the other issues that I want to focus on is the fact that we have hundreds of thousands of people who actually are working 40 hours a week. Some of them commuting from Wexford to Dublin, probably another hour and a half or 2 hour commute, both sides of that journey. And these people are not getting paid enough to be able to pay the simple bills that society is throwing at them. Now, any society that forces a person to work 40 hours and then tells them that their wage is not going to be sufficient enough to be able to cover their costs is a society built on injustice. So we need to make sure that we have workers' rights in this society, that workers can make sure they have decent contracts, that those contracts are not 0 hour contracts or low hour contracts, that they have the ability to collectively bargain together, that they have the ability to just get a proper, decent wage for a proper, decent day's work. And we need to make sure that that happens soon. But we also need to make sure that those who invest, those who work hard, those who take risks, those who spend time in education, that they also have an economic benefit from the work that they do. Because if you don't have an incentive, an economic incentive for those efforts, you just won't have those efforts in the country. And you won't have an engine of an economy functioning to be able to provide for the economic needs of a people. And that's very, very important. So we're looking to focus on that. One of the issues that we want further investment in the likes of healthcare, for sure. but we also want to tackle the maladministration that's happening in healthcare. So a lot of people in the left just focus on the funding of these organisations. But if there's hundreds of millions of euros not getting to frontline services in the health service, that's actually worse than underfunding the health service. Because that money is going into a black hole and has been taken away from the people who actually need it for themselves. So one of the problems I have as well currently is there's a big effort by the political establishment in this country to knock the economic justice issues off the radar, off the political hotspots. So if you look at, for example, Simon Harris over the last 2 years, I mentioned some of the chaos that's happening in the health service. I only mentioned a small number of them. What has Simon Harris been talking about for the last 2 years? Has he been talking about hospital waiting lists? Has he been talking about trolleys or mental health services, etc.? No. Simon Harris spent 2 years talking about abortion, so he has. 2 years. And at the end of 2018, I was listening to some of the political shows on the radio and the television, and many of them were lauding Simon Harris. Now, we are living in a different planet to those commentators. The people who have to access health, 300 people die every year due to hospital overcrowding. And some of the media establishment were lauding a minister that is presiding over this catastrophe in our health services. Simon Harris was at a Fine Gael think-in recently. His only responsibility of the thinking was to chair a meeting about how to remove a number of nuns from the boards of management of hospitals in the country. His only responsibility that he took. It is in Leo Varadkar's interest to distract the nation with the culture wars. He doesn't want us thinking about economic justice issues, because if people focus on those issues, they'll realise that the mess that the government is making. Our job is to crowbar economic justice issues back up to the top of the political agenda. Because I'll tell you, there is a hierarchy of need. People need to feed themselves, need to clothe themselves, house their family, gain access to education, and be able to gain access to the health services. They're the issues that people focus on when it comes to elections, and they are the issues that we will be focusing on as a political party as we engage with them. The other issue that I want to speak on is a lot of small indigenous businesses. Unfortunately, the political left in this country often pits those on 20 grand against those who are on 60 grand, and those on 30 grand against those on 40 grand. And then they pit all of those people against anybody who's running a small business. And typically the person running a small business is probably on roughly that same wage anyways as those people. And I actually think we need to actually represent all those people. For sure, those people need to have progressive tax rates. But the truth of the matter is, small businesses is getting left behind in this country. This country, now we need foreign direct investment, and foreign direct investment is a positive thing. And we will chase foreign direct investment in government. But the point is, small to medium-sized enterprise also needs government support. They shouldn't be the poor relation. So when it comes to insurance costs, when it comes to access to credit, when it comes to all the different utility costs that small businesses are dealing with, when it comes to the migration of retail from the main street up to the internet, and most of that is actually going abroad, small businesses need far more support from ourselves. And one of the major problems I have in this country as well is the elephant in the room economically. People sometimes forget that last year, 87% of the wealth in the world concentrated in the hands of 1% of the population. 60 people on the planet had the same wealth as 3.5 billion people. That level of income inequality is feudal in its makeup. It's absolutely incredible that that is the case. And I believe that that's part of the energy and the anger that's behind what we're seeing in France at the moment. And this country is no different. Last year, 85 people who are considered high net worth individuals, who have 50 million euros worth of wealth, paid a tax at the average industrial wage of 37,000 euros. It's incredible. I call it the L'Oreal tax, because they're worth it. It's absolutely nuts. And another 140 people with roughly the same wealth pay tax at just a higher level, at the same rate as a person on 100,000 euros. We had a situation in 2016 where a REIT, this is a big international firm who's competing for new homes with first-time buyers, made a profit of 250 million euros, paid a tax of 5 million euros, 2%. It's an incredible figure. We have vulture funds in this country who were invited in, given a red carpet by Michael Noonan and Fine Gael, to literally buy up distressed assets, i.e. families, businesses and farms, to grind as much profit out of those people as they could, and then throw those people in the scrap heap. And yet, Michael Noonan said in a question, he said, well, vultures are an important part of the ecosystem. How else do you clean up carcasses? But he doesn't realise that the carcasses in this system are families, farmers and business people. And the truth of the matter is, the Finance Committee in Leinster has asked the vulture funds to come before them a dozen times, and each time the vulture funds say no thanks, they're unregulated, they won't come before the Finance Committee. And yet they have gone into the Department of Finance 125 times. They'll speak to the unelected government, but they won't speak to the elected government, the people that you actually vote for. And that's at the heart of one of the major problems. So we need tax justice in this country. We absolutely need to make sure that people pay their fair share. And the massive international oligopolies, the big firms that are growing at the moment, that are so powerful that they're telling governments what to do and what rates to charge, that needs to change. Interestingly, one of those, in Dublin, I believe it was in 2016, 45% of the new houses that were built were bought up by international investors. So they were squeezing, they were getting capital internationally at really low interest rates, making massive profits, paying a really low tax, and squeezing out first-time buyers out of the market, which is absolutely unjust. So we need to make sure that changes. The other issue that I want to just touch on, the banking industry is a major problem in Ireland. Again, Fine Gael and Michael Noonan set up two major banks in Ireland. They have 85% of the market. They are what's known in economic terms, again, as an oligopoly. That means they have massive control. They can charge the interest rates they want to charge. They can charge all the fees they want to charge. They can decide who gets cash, who gets credits, and where and when they do business. In other countries, they have a far more what's called a perfect competition model. So they have loads of much smaller banks. First of all, the benefit of that is they're not systemically important. So if one or two of them crash, it doesn't bring down a whole country like what we see here in Ireland. So the Sparkassen model works in Germany. It's a public banking system, and it happens on a regional basis. And the money that's achieved in the Sparkassen model goes back into the local area. And they're far less likely to be able to control how the market works. And actually that's what we need to achieve in Ireland. But again, Michael Noonan won't let it. We have a credit union in this country that had 12 billion euros in the depths of a crash that wants to invest that money into housing and other investments. And Fine Gael government would not allow them to do that. It was absolutely incredible. I met with the regulator on the credit union system, and they felt at the time that credit unions didn't have the management capacity to be able to deal with that level of lending into the system. Build the management capacity that's necessary and let them do it. Don't hold them back for this length of time and hold back the country as a result of it. We also want to make sure that we focus on regional development. Ireland is an outlier in European terms. We are nearly a city-state currently. It's incredible. There's no other European country that I can think of that invests so much of their infrastructure, so much of their investments, so much of their business and population into one city. The country is lopsided at the moment, and the government have made the necessary efforts to create a new urban area that will attract international investment away from Dublin. It's no good for Dublin, because Dublin's overheating. It's burning up at the moment with regards being able to take the people that are in it. And very simply, the government needs to stop being rudderless with regards to spatial development and make sure that they are investing in infrastructure in the rest of the country so the rest of the country can function. If they build infrastructure, it will come. And that is really important as well. And the other pluralist party, and that's very important to us. We want to be a party of Catholic, Protestant, dissenter, atheist, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh. Everybody should be able to find a space in our country. There's two types of secularism that exist in the world. The first type of secularism is one that seeks to delete people's religious expression and cultural expression from the public domain. I believe that's what we're seeing happening in Ireland at the moment. There's another type of secularism, And that's one that welcomes the diversity of the world and seeks that it flourishes. Nobody, because of their faith, should live in fear of being able to express it in any way. The state should never show favour or cause fear to anybody with regards their cultural or religious background. And there's a danger that's happening in Ireland at the moment, and we seek, obviously, to reverse that too. Obviously, many people who are here with regards to the issues of the right to life. For me, obviously, the right to life is a human right. If you don't have the right to life, you cannot be guaranteed any other right whatsoever. All of the rights are dependent, first and foremost, on your right to life. Anybody that saw the legislation as it went through Leinster House will probably be like myself, broken-hearted with regards to what happened. We proposed a number of very mild amendments that really weren't going to narrow access to the abortion services at all, but simply tried to inject some level of humanity into it. So we sought, one, that there would be pain relief for an unborn child after 20 weeks gestation, and that will be inserted into the legislation. Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour and Sinn Féin voted against that. We saw that there would be comfort care and medical treatment given to a child who had survived abortion. And I don't know if anybody saw, the Irish Times last week covered an article where a 21-year-old man in Germany passed away. He had been a survivor of abortion. Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Labour and Sinn Féin voted against that. Now, Fine Gael TD went so far as to say that it was a fairy story, that none of this really existed whatsoever. We saw that there would be an offer of an ultrasound given to a mother before she decided to have an abortion. An offer, one that could be declined, a choice. We were told that the whole issue, the referendum, was about choice, but we were told that we were misogynists for offering a mother potentially an ultrasound before an abortion. We thought that there would be a ban with regards to abortion in the case of disability and gender selection. Harris' promise was on the record in advance of the referendum saying that you would not be able to have an abortion in Ireland with regards to the issue of disability. And that's obviously clearly rubbish, and I think most people would admit that that's rubbish. And yet, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour and Sinn Féin voted against that particular amendment. We thought that doctors would have proper freedom of conscience. Doctors, nurses, midwives, and all healthcare workers would have proper freedom of conscience. And again, the establishment, in lockstep, voted against this. We thought that parental notification would exist. That if you had a child at 16 years old and who was making the choice to have an abortion, that you'd be able to know about it. That you'd be able to support the child in whatever way you could. That you'd be able to maybe advise your child like a parent would love to be able to advise. And yet, all of those parties voted against it. And it was incredible. It was like watching a national government. All the opposition were in ceasefire, all of the parties in lockstep with each other. And more than that, the atmosphere of that particular debate was the most aggressive atmosphere that I have ever seen in Leinster House. It was so aggressive that a colleague of mine, Carol Nolan, was forced to tears simply for trying to defend herself and her views. And the aggression wasn't by accident. The aggression was a tool to shut down debate. Because we were trying to engage with people with radically different views than ourselves. But they, on purpose, were calling us all the most ridiculous names and worst names possible. They were misapplying or misappropriating our reasons to bringing these amendments forward. So, for example, we wanted to collect information on the new services that are going forward. And the purpose we wanted to collect those information for was we wanted to ameliorate some of the reasons that force many women to feel that they have to have an abortion. Now, so, for example, Simon Harris says he is pro-choice, but Simon Harris's economic policies make so many women feel they have no choice. 19 women gave birth last year who were homeless. 19 women gave birth last year who were homeless. That is an absolutely disgusting figure, and it comes straight from Simon Harris's government. Now, we wanted to collect information as according to European norms. We weren't moving away from European norms whatsoever. And one of the pieces of information was that we sought to collect the ethnicity of the mother who was looking for the abortion. Now, party after party stood up and called us misogynists and racists. They told us we were from, 1980s South Africa, 1950s South America. And the ironic thing is that these virtue signaling TDs weren't even used in their heads. But because the issue of ethnicity is in the British system of collecting information. It was put there on request from the British Equality Authority, an organisation designed to prevent inequalities within society. Because they wanted to know and understand again what were the ethnic reasons why there were disparities between abortion from different races. You know, ignorance isn't anti-racism. Knowledge is anti-racism. And this is the reason that we wanted to collect that information. So again, we could, as a country, ameliorate some of the reasons why people might have abortions in future. So that was how the abortion rate has, the abortion debate happened. The tactic was to close down debate. The tactic was to say, you shall never come back here with those amendments ever again, because if you do, we'll take the head off you. And many of the TDs that I spoke to, hardened TDs, long-standing TDs, robust characters, they said, Peadar, I'm not going into that debate. They'll take the head off me. Now, if they don't take the head off me, the papers will tomorrow. And that's the type of political culture that's wrong. Because those politicians sort of says, I don't care what they say. I believe what is right, and I will represent respectfully my views and the views of the people in there. If you had 24 of those people in that chamber, the debate would be radically different. But you don't yet. And that's the truth. One of the things I will say is we've gone around the country and we've seen many full rooms like this, many great, I suppose, bastions of energy. Now, one thing I will say, there are some people who have their heads down still, though, with regards to the referendum. There are some people who I would call who are navel-gazing with regards to the referendum. And I say to those people, the time is over for that luxury. We don't have time to navel-gaze. 723,000 people voted no in the referendum. At least another 20% of the population who voted yes did so for rape, incest, and life-limiting conditions, those really tragic and difficult situations. So if you add that to the 720,000, you're talking about 1 million people who do not agree or who oppose the extreme legislation that we have at the moment. In the north of Ireland, there's at least 700,000 people who would be on the same page as ourselves politically. Now, we have a job to make sure that those views are represented in Leinster House. We have a job to tie much of that energy together, fold it into place, and focus on the development of our society. And that's one of the projects that we have to do over the next while. Just a couple of other issues that I want to touch on before we open to questions. We want to be an anti-corruption party. For too long, this country has been riven with corruption. And we're only good about looking at corruption in the past. And we have a political class who will rip their shirts in anger with regards to the corruption of the past. And yet the corruption today, where it actually has a negative effect on our lives, is being ignored. And Maurice McCabe did a great duty and great gift to this country with regards to his work. And it was a wonderful television show that was on television before Christmas. We owe a debt of gratitude to Maurice McCabe, but it also shines a light into the Garda force and other aspects of our society that needs to be changed. There are some very good Gardaí and people who are putting themselves on the line regularly for this country, but we owe them too to fix the problems that exist in that force. We also need to make sure that people feel safe. I know town squares in Ireland where there's drug dealing going on in broad daylight. I know rural areas where families are sleeping in locked bedrooms, never mind locked houses, because of the fear that they're in. And as a result of the government closing down Garda stations, closing down schools, closing down post offices, we have an Ireland where there's neither broadband connectivity or human connectivity anymore. And both are important. And I'd actually say that human connectivity is actually probably more important. Because lack of human connectivity leads to really serious problems within society, especially with regards to mental health. And we need to make sure that as a party we focus on building our local communities and our local organisations again. The other issue that I want to speak on is the issue that we will be a Euro-critical party. Going back to the idea of self-determination being really important to us, that neither Berlin, Brussels or London should be making our laws for ourselves. We oppose EU militarism and we oppose EU federalism. We're not talking about pulling out of the EU. Right now, anybody wise will have to watch what's going on in Britain first before they make any decision such as that. Secondly, anybody who says that we should pull out of the EU today should be able to tell people what it's going to cost to do that. What is the economic ramifications to that? We've gone through serious economic turmoil at the moment, and taking a decision that could cause that more serious economic turmoil needs to have proper work done on it before that's achieved. Also, and last but not least, we support Irish language and Irish culture. Right now, the Irish language is spoken in a few communities still in this country, and those communities, it's estimated, won't be speaking Irish as a community language for more than another 15 or 16 years. We might be the last generation where Irish is spoken as a community language. And we have a moral responsibility that when we're talking to our kids or our grandchildren, that we're not talking about Irish as a living language in the past. Irish is an infrastructure of thought. And that infrastructure of thought goes back to that diversity that we're talking about earlier. And that's necessary in a world where languages are dying on a weekly and monthly basis. I speak Irish language. I speak Irish to my kids, except when I'm thick, I speak a little bit of English to them. Then I know I'm in bad form, obviously, when the English comes out. But it's a really easy language to actually transmit to the next generation, and there's no cost to it at all if it's done properly. Also, we want to be an environmentalist party. Many people in rooms like this will have different views with regards to the environment. But I will say one thing: we are living at a generation of mass extinction with regards to species. An extinction that hasn't been seen for hundreds and thousands of years. We're also living in a society that has thousands of acres of ocean with floating plastic within it. And we're living in a society where there is serious man-made climate change happening. And we have to be able to pass on this globe of ours to the next generation, I believe, in a better shape than we actually received it ourselves. So, the party is going to be a grassroots, activist-based organisation. And just to give you a little bit of background of where we're at the moment, we have, obviously, we had our first oratorial meeting of the party there on January the 5th, and we selected the officer board of that oratorium. We have 1,400 people who have signed up to the organisation so far, which is an incredible figure. We have 9 elected reps who have declared for us. That puts us ahead now of the Social Democrats, who've been around for 3 years, and we're not been around for 6 weeks at this stage. We're edging closer to passing the Green Party out, and I'm hopeful that we might have 15 or 20 elected representatives as members of this organisation before the local elections. We then hope to have, I'm speaking to about 20 other elected reps, and every couple of days somebody comes to talk to me with regards to joining. I'm hopeful that we will have selection conventions around the country in the first couple of weeks of February, so that we can select candidates to run in the next local election. And I'm hoping that nationally we will come back with around 40 councillors across the country. If we come back across with 40 councillors in the country, we will have put down a massive foundation, because every community in the country will have access to one of our elected reps. And then they will get to know us and know that they can trust us and that they can work with us, and that we will work for them. The other aspect about the political organisation is we will be an activist organisation. There's 2 types of wars in politics. There's the air war, and then there's the ground war. We won't control the air war. There will be some decent journalists who will give us a fair break, but there will be many who won't. So the ground war is on-the-ground activism. It's getting stuck in your local residents association, your neighbourhood watch scheme. It's getting stuck into the local campaigns on the hospital, or the bypass, or the issue around wind turbines, or whatever the issue is that's important to your local community. It's getting out on the doors on a regular basis, week after week, so that you build the knowledge, the political capital, and the relationship with the people that you're seeking to serve. Now, if you do that level of activism, we can't be beat. There's absolutely no way we can do it. Because most of the political parties are actually retreating from that level of activism. And we need to make sure that we get back into that. And that's one of the reasons why we're setting up Common around the country. I don't know if you know what a Common is, but people who would have a political background It's simply a branch of the organisation in your local area, where members congregate together and they obviously get to know each other, they start to work with each other, they start to develop plans, strategies, and start to promote the politics of the organisation locally, and they also start to run candidates and work for the people in the local area. So we have 20 coming up and running throughout the country currently. We hope to have 100 functioning in Ireland before the end of February, and indeed there's a couple of commons on the way here in Wexford. Now what I will say to you is there are two types of members of this organisation. The first is the common activist. That's the gold-plated member, if you like, the person who's out there week in, week out, knocking on the doors and finding out what's going on and trying to fix the situation. There is space in our party, though, for people who just want to become members of our organisation, but just because of whatever reason there is, they just can't get involved in the day-to-day activism, and they're welcome too. But the first one is the key to opening the lock of making sure that we win elections. We want to be known by our activism. We want to out-activism everybody else. We want to say, people say, you want to get something done, you come to us. And that's really important. The other issue that I just want to touch on as well is money. Now, I hate talking about money, but the other political parties are rich, they are state supported, they get money from the state through your taxes on an annual basis. We won't get any of that until the next general election. We will survive, function, and be able to work on the basis of raising funds locally. Now, I will say to you is this: we won't take corporate donations, because we will not be owned by anybody at all except our members. But what we do is, in meetings like this, we have a couple of buckets and we pass them around. We ask people to throw a few bob in them, and if you might pass that around there, please, if they can at all. And we develop the organisation in that manner. There's other ways that people can help us out with regards to fundraising. And some people have suggested that it might be a good idea to set up direct debits of €5 a month or €20 a month, etc. There's no onus on anybody to do any of that. It's up to yourselves as such. But obviously that type of funds allows us to build up a war chest and make sure that we actually beat the establishment at their own game. In the local elections, it takes between €3,000 and €5,000 to run a local candidate in a local election. Now, if you're looking to run 70 candidates in a country, that shows you what kind of money is absolutely necessary to achieve that. So we do need to fundraise. The other thing that I just want to say that some people have said, well, this is an uphill struggle, you'll never get there. But I will say to them this: I have no doubt, with the level of demand that we have seen over the last while, is unprecedented. And the necessity for our new political machine is unprecedented as well. And I honestly believe, if we don't make it, there's nobody else coming behind us. Nobody else. This is it. It's happening now. And the meetings that we're going to, we're having 350 people. We're in Cork, 270 people in Donegal. Rooms are full like this right around the country. And the level of enthusiasm, the media has actually taken note as well with regards to what's happening, and some of the political parties have taken note. People are coming to us from Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Sinn Féin, Labour and the Independents. We're actually talking to a councillor who was a AAA councillor, believe it or not, a short time ago. So I just want to leave you with this. We can be a postscript, we can be a postscript to a very, very divisive referendum that happened in 2018. Or we can be the foundation for an organisation that builds for generations. That's the decision that we can make. Now, for that decision to actually manifest, we need to take responsibility. People cannot walk out of here. If you believe what I have said, if you feel that you're on the same page with 65% of what the content that I've discussed, I'm asking you to go to the back of the room, sign your name,